What's up, gamers? It's me, John Honkai Impact 3rd here, and today I'm going to be talking about ZZZ and my mid-game experience so far. I have a lot of things to say, and a lot of things have changed since my first video, so I do want to correct some things, as well as address some points. So this will be basically a mid-game review of Zenless Zone Zero. I think my general impression of the story is still the same as it was back then. I think it's really good, but also very messy, and it's definitely not for everyone. There's no clear direction, and it's a lot more slice of lifey, but it's a really funny story. There were definitely times where I was actually laughing out loud due to how stupid the plot was, and I'm saying stupid in like a affectionate sense, but it really is stupid. Unfortunately, I don't love it that much because I don't feel like there's anything really ever at stake, and that's just my personal opinion. I do think that a lot of people like this story because of how casual it is. It feels a lot less committal than like Genshin or HSR's story. The animation, as usual, is very superb, and I love all the cutscenes. Although I don't think we'll ever get anything too crazy, at least, just because the game still feels a lot more down to earth. The animation, as usual, is really great, and the Miyabi cutscene completely blew me away. I honestly was not expecting this so early in the game, and I hope we get to see more of this. I'm also hoping we see maybe some more like potentially even like Honkai Impact level animations. I'm kind of hoping, because I think out of all the Hoyoverse games, Honkai Impact actually has the best cutscenes, and if Zenless Zone Zero takes over as the best cutscene games, I'm not gonna complain. That's cool as hell. I think one of my biggest drawbacks with the story, though, is how many interludes there are in between. It feels like I'm constantly like getting stopped in the middle of a story, and I really just want to finish like an arc, and I'm not allowed to. So my impression's mostly still the same. I actually think it's a little bit messier because now that I'm in the mid game, it feels like interludes last a lot longer. And it feels like I'm not able to do the story as fast as I used to be able to. It's still pretty fast, but it feels a lot choppier because of how many interludes there are. Otherwise, though, I do think it's really good for a slice of life / casual kind of story, but definitely not for everyone. But I am trying to enjoy the story a little bit as I get more into the game. So, you guys watched my first video. You guys know that I actually didn't like the combat that much. I thought it was mid, and I changed my mind. I actually do think the combat is pretty fun. And that it's a lot more complex than I originally expected. I got a lot of comments that were shitting on me for saying that the combat is not complex enough, and they were right. I was playing like shit in the first video, but I do think that there is some valid points that I've made from the first video. But let me start with the positives. The gameplay is actually way faster than I expected, although I do think that this is kind of dependent on what agents you have. Like, I think Ellen comps are a lot faster and feel a lot more fun versus, like, in my opinion, like Soldier 11 feels kind of like mid because you have to time your auto attacks, and it feels like it takes a lot longer to like get her going. One of my biggest complaints in my old video was that it takes too long to charge up skills, and I'm happy to that this issue was fixed once I started doing rotations. I was able to use skills a lot faster, and also ultimate a lot faster. Although I still do wish that I could chain ultimates, not like just QTE chain ultimates, but like the actual like Q button. I can see a lot of people go in the comments like, wow, of course the gameplay gets better once you learn rotations, like this should be obvious, right? And the fact is, I didn't learn rotations for my first video because it was the first impression, and I do think that there's a serious issue here at hand, in the fact that the combat seems like shit if you don't know rotations. And so you might just say, okay, well, learn rotations then. My issue is that there's no reason to really learn rotations in the first like 20 hours or even 30 hours of the game. When you're first playing a game, you don't immediately start out by learning the combat. Most people just like take their time learning it, right? They don't learn it all at the start. And there's no incentive to learn it either at the start. I think a lot of people that are at the end game of ZZZ or even the mid game will disregard this point, but I think it's important to note because I think that there's a reason why a lot of people, and I say a lot, I'm talking a lot of people, don't like Zenless Zone Zero. And it's the fact that the gameplay feels really bad and slow at the start. Not because it actually is bad and slow, it's just that there's no reason to make it better for yourself by learning combat, right? You just play what you're given. Now, obviously not everyone's gonna agree that the gameplay is bad at the start, but my personal opinion is that I didn't like the game at the start, and a lot of people didn't like it either. And it only got better for me because I forced myself to play till the mid-game because I made a promise to you guys that I'd make a video on my mid-game experience and if it got any better, which it did. I genuinely enjoyed the game a lot now. The combat's way more fun. The game is genuinely really good, especially as you learn the combat and get farther into the game. But Hoyoverse can't expect players to dump 20 to 40 hours in the early mid-game to enjoy the game later on. Like, if the game is unenjoyable at the start, people are gonna quit. And for me, I almost quit. I had to push myself to play to the mid-game and start enjoying the game. And I want to elaborate more on why this is, as well as like why it's not important to learn the combat, which is what causes the game to be weak at the early game at least. So what I'm playing right now on screen for you guys is some Chapter 2 gameplay on the story in challenge mode. I'm using the trial characters, and I literally have never played any of these characters before. I played Coletta a little bit, but I honestly don't really have to play her at all. And I managed to clear the entire story for Chapter 2 without knowing anything about these characters and how they work. And that's what I'm saying by, like, you don't need to learn the combat. Even in challenge mode, there's no incentive to, because there's no reason to at the beginning, since you can clear everything with like relative ease. Basically, I think the early game is just way too easy. I don't think it's bad if the casual mode is easy, but even if the challenge mode is easy and can be cleared without knowing a single thing about rotations, I just think that is a flaw, because it's called challenge mode for a reason. And so a lot of hardcore gamers like me who are looking for a similar experience to like Wuthering Waves or Honkai Impact 3rd are gonna be disappointed, because the game feels like it's slow, like the combat feels slow, everything takes a long time to recharge, and there's no punishment for playing slow and like bad, because you can just still clear all the content with relative ease. So the question is, how do we force players to play better? And I think a good example is actually this Wuthering Waves gameplay. This is a late game boss, but you will encounter early game bosses in Wuthering Waves that will actually kill you if you're bad at dodging, as well as if you're not good at like making your rotations, because there's like certain DPS windows that you have to maximize. I think in Zenless Zone Zero, especially challenge mode, bosses don't feel necessarily that hard to kill, even if you have really bad combos. And I got away with like not dodging a lot of things and still beating like these levels. Like I said, I don't mind if casual mode is really easy. That's fine. But I think challenge mode has to present a bigger challenge. And I also think that the combat has to be like not necessarily forced on the player, but there has to be an incentive to learn the combat in the first place. I think another game that incentivizes combat in the early game is Honkai Impact. They introduced the Abyss mode very early on, and basically, if you don't clear the mode fast enough, you actually start burning to death. Like your characters start burning to death, and it really makes you learn rotations, or else you just keep losing these Abyss modes, which give you free crystals, right? Honkai Impact also provides tactic classes on how to do rotations on all of your characters, as well as how to use them in like teams. I think that Zenless Zone Zero does kind of do this with the trials, but I don't think it's nearly in-depth enough and not even comparable to the Honkai Impact tactic classes. My point isn't that the Zenless Zone Zero's gameplay is bad. In fact, I actually think it's really good. It's just that there's no reason to reach like this peak of like fun combat in this game. I don't think a lot of players want to learn combat right off the bat, and the issue is that the gameplay, in my opinion, is pretty bad if you don't understand the combat. Now that I finally had the chance to play Shiyu Defense, I do think that Shiyu Defense is a pretty good way of incentivizing players to learn the combat, because it gives crystals, or I guess polychromes as they're called, right? Rolling currency, basically. And it's time gated. Now, I don't like time gated gameplay that much, but I think it might be necessary in this kind of game to actually incentivize players to learn the combat. The issue is, you have to play through like 30 hours, like 20 to 30 hours to get to Shiyu Defense, right? And then, even then, like, imagine not liking the game by that time. Like, that's just a waste of 20 to 30 hours. You have to think about how much things you'd be doing during that time, right? So I think players should look at it from both sides, right? I think a lot of players are like invalidating the opinions of people that quit early as just like they're too hardcore for the game. I don't think they are. I actually think they'd like this game if they knew how the combat worked, right? And on the other side, you're going to see people say stuff like, this is a mashing game. It's not just a mashing game. It really is more than that. It's actually a pretty complex game. The issue is the early game really is just a mashing game, right? And it's really hard to expect people to sink in that much time for a game that they might not even like. That's the important part, okay? I managed to sink time in, and I like the game now. But if I didn't like the game, to me, it'd be a complete waste of like 30 hours, right? Also, TV gameplay still sucks, and it just gets worse and worse the more I play it. It doesn't get any better, I'm sorry. I know some people kind of like it, but I think most people agree with me that it kind of sucks. And there is some quest that's all TV, and it's so boring. So here's my thoughts on the game, basically. I still think the story is pretty good for casual players, and the combat is genuinely really fun now that I've learned it. And I do think that I'm wrong in my last video to call it not complex. I think a lot of the characters are really fun to play and have a lot of weird nuances, and although it's just a rotation-based game in the end, a lot of gacha games are just like that. But I really want to nail this point down, that the early game is just way too slow at its current state, and I really don't think that I can like justify convincing people to sink in 20 to 30 hours into the game to get into Shiyu Defense and finally start playing like actual combat that matters, I guess. I know this video seems really negative because I really nailed down this point about how I think the game fails to incentivize players to like play better, but I'm just doing it because I really want the game to be successful. I really love this game, and I know it sounds bad, like this entire video sounds bad, but trust me, I actually love this game. I truly recommend it. But at the same time, if you're not willing to sink 20 hours in this game to see like the mid game, that's fair too. And I don't think people should be disregarding those points at least. But overall, a very good game, very good combat. I got way better at it, and I enjoyed it a lot more afterwards. So yeah, thanks for watching, guys.